Welcome back to Juvenile Justice Policy CRJU 303A. Today we'll be discussing Chapter 3 of the text, Child Abuse and Neglect. In today's chapter, we are going to explore one of the most sensitive and important areas within juvenile justice: violence, abuse, and exploitation involving children and families. Before we dive deeper into the material, let me walk you through our learning objectives for this chapter. By the time you finish this unit, you should be able to confidently do the following. First, you should be able to understand domestic or family violence. That means not only recognizing what qualifies as family violence, but also being able to identify patterns, risk factors, and the ways these dynamics impact children and adolescents. Second, you should be able to discuss child maltreatment. We'll look at how maltreatment is defined in legal and social service contexts and how it's measured, and how responding agencies can intervene. Third, you should understand and explain the four major types of abuse and neglect: physical abuse of juveniles, child neglect, psychological or emotional abuse of juveniles, and sexual abuse of juveniles. For each category, we'll look at indicators, common myths, and the short and long-term effects on young people. Fourth, you should be able to analyze internet exploitation. With technology playing an increasing role in children's lives, we'll examine how online environments can facilitate grooming, trafficking, and other forms of victimization, and what current research tells us about prevalence and prevention. Finally, by the end of the chapter, you should be able to identify intervention strategies. We'll discuss how professionals respond to abuse, neglect, and internet exploitation, as well as emerging approaches that prioritize trauma-informed care and early prevention. These learning objectives will guide our discussion and help you focus on the essential concepts as you move through the readings and activities. So with that foundation in place, let's begin. Now that we've outlined our learning objectives, let's begin with a broad overview of domestic or family violence and how it impacts children and adolescents. Research consistently shows that children are exposed to violence at alarming rates. Studies from the United States and other developed countries estimate that between 1/4 and 1/3 of all children experience some form of violence during childhood. This exposure can include physical abuse, sexual abuse, witnessing domestic violence, bullying, dating violence, or other violent victimizations. What's especially troubling is that children in the United States are more likely to be exposed to violence than adults, and this exposure can occur both directly through physical, emotional, or sexual assaults, or indirectly, such as witnessing violence against family members or friends. Regardless of how they experience it, the impact can be profound. Violence exposure is linked to long-term physical, emotional, and mental health consequences, including depression, anxiety, PTSD, substance abuse, delinquency, and academic difficulties. It's important to note, however, that children do not all respond the same way. Many show what researchers call remarkable resilience. But for those whose trauma is unrecognized or untreated, the consequences can last well into adulthood, affecting long-term health, relationships, and even increasing the likelihood of becoming involved in violence themselves, either as victims or perpetrators. Family violence, sometimes referred to as domestic violence or intimate partner violence, involves intentional harm inflicted by someone with a close relationship, a spouse, partner, or ex-partner. Although families are often idealized as safe, loving environments, decades of research have shown that the home can be one of the most dangerous places for both adults and children. National data reveals that family violence accounts for roughly 1 in 10 violent offenses. Women are the majority of victims, and children are frequently victimized or witness the violence, placing them at high risk for emotional and behavioral problems. In fact, men who batter their partners also batter their children between 30% and 60% of the time, and youth who witness domestic violence often struggle in their future relationships, including experiencing dating violence or difficulties with parenting later in life. Family violence is closely connected to child maltreatment. Studies show that about 1 in 10 children experience maltreatment in a given year. About 1 in 5 experience it at some point in their childhood. Rates rise significantly among older youth, especially ages 14 to 17. Very young children, especially those under age 3, are the most vulnerable to fatal abuse. Sadly, in the United States, over 1,700 children die each year from abuse or neglect, and parents are responsible for the majority of these deaths. Multiple factors affect a child's likelihood of experiencing violence or maltreatment, including age, sex, and family structure. Sibling violence, for instance, is extremely common and often overlooked, with older boys and siblings close in age reporting higher rates of aggression. While identifying and helping abused children is critically important, it is also extremely challenging. The privacy of the home, along with fear, shame, or retaliation, makes intervention difficult. Courts also face the complicated task of balancing children's safety with the legal system's traditional emphasis on preserving families, a tension that can sometimes leave children in harmful environments. The consequences of child maltreatment are not only personal, but societal. Economists estimate that the annual lifetime cost of child abuse and neglect in the United States now exceeds $400 billion, with expenses ranging from medical and mental health care to criminal justice costs, lost productivity, and child welfare services. Finally, research shows that child abuse is rarely a one-time event. Children who have been abused once are significantly more likely to be abused again, highlighting the need for early identification and effective intervention. Next, let's turn to a focused discussion on child maltreatment, one of the most severe and tragic forms of violence affecting youth. Child maltreatment includes physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, and neglect. While some cases make national headlines, like the widely reported death of 7-year-old Mary Brown in New York, most instances never reach the media. Yet the scope of the problem is vast. In the United States, an average of 5 children die every day due to abuse or neglect, and the youngest children are at the greatest risk. Infants and toddlers, because of their size, dependency, and limited ability to seek help, account for nearly 3/4 of all child fatalities, with almost half occurring in infants younger than 1 year old. Even these numbers are likely underestimated. For every child who dies, many more survive with injuries or long-term trauma. National statistics show that over 60% of victims suffer neglect. About 11% experience physical abuse, around 7% experience sexual abuse, and more than 15% endure multiple types of maltreatment. Beyond abuse by adults, children may also experience sibling abuse, which research suggests is actually more common than parental abuse. About 1/3 of children report being physically assaulted by a sibling at some point, and up to 40% report repeated bullying by a brother or sister. Too often, parents dismiss these behaviors as normal sibling rivalry, when in fact they may involve serious physical, emotional, or even sexual harm. Sibling abuse often emerges in homes with dysfunctional family dynamics, such as inconsistent parenting, rigid gender roles, poor supervision, power imbalances, or families coping with parents' mental illness or substance abuse. Children may mimic violent behavior they've observed from adults or act out feelings of stress, jealousy, or neglect on a younger sibling. A related but especially sensitive issue is sibling incest. Although it is less common than adult-child sexual abuse, it remains significantly underreported. Sibling incest can include sexual behavior ranging from fondling to intercourse, and it most often involves an older sibling harming a younger one. Studies show that the risk increases in families where a parent is absent or emotionally unavailable, parents struggle with addiction or mental illness, there is a material conflict or exposure to sexualized environments, or there are many children with limited supervision. Most acts of sibling incest occur within male-female sibling pairs and tend to last months or years. Because the behavior often begins as curiosity or experimentation, both children may initially see it as consensual, but it still meets the definition of maltreatment due to the power imbalance and psychological harm. Given the seriousness of child maltreatment, all 50 states have enacted mandatory reporting laws. These laws require certain professionals, such as teachers, doctors, nurses, social workers, counselors, law enforcement officers, and others who regularly work with children, to report suspected abuse or neglect. Most states provide civil immunity for reports made in good faith and allow exceptions to normal privacy rules, such as spousal privilege or physician-patient confidentiality. At the federal level, the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act, or CAPTA, defines maltreatment as any recent act or failure to act by a caregiver that results in serious harm or creates an imminent risk of serious harm. States may expand on this definition in their statutes, and they also determine which individuals can legally be reported, what exceptions apply, and how religious objections to medical treatment are handled. For example, most states allow families to raise a religious objection to medical care, although many still authorize courts to order treatment when a child's health is in danger. In addition, about 1/3 of states allow for exceptions based on a parent's financial inability to provide certain services, and many states recognize the legality of reasonable physical discipline as long as it does not cause injury. Taken together, these laws reflect a nationwide effort to protect children, yet they also highlight the complex balance between parental rights, cultural values, and child safety. Physical abuse isn't always clear-cut. Society generally agrees that extreme acts like kicking, burning, strangling, or other severe violence clearly constitute abuse, but most cases aren't that obvious. Questions like, is spanking abuse? What about using a belt? Does the child's age matter? What if the injury risk is greater? Show how blurry the line between discipline and abuse can become. These borderline cases are the ones that create the greatest challenges for families, mandatory reporters, and intervention agencies. Legally, physical abuse is typically defined as acts that cause or create a substantial risk of physical injury. Most states also include threats of harm, and some states even classify certain forms of trafficking or involuntary servitude involving minors as physical abuse. It's also important to understand that physical abuse often occurs within a cycle of frustration, unrealistic expectations, and conflict. Parents who lack support, who were abused themselves, or who feel insecure may respond harshly when a child does not meet expectations. This can involve toddlers behaving as toddlers, spilling food and being messy, or adolescents pushing boundaries. When these situations unfold in environments of stress, poverty, or isolation, the risk of physical abuse grows. Research also shows that abuse occurs across all social classes, all genders, and all racial and ethnic groups. However, certain factors increase the risk. These include poverty, young parental age, limited education, unemployment, and a lack of social support. Children with disabilities are also at significantly higher risk. Importantly, poverty by itself is not considered abuse. Most states explicitly exempt situations where a parent cannot provide due to financial inability alone. Still, poverty is strongly associated with higher stress levels, community violence, and fewer support resources, all of which can increase risk. Children who experience physical abuse face serious long-term consequences, including lower academic achievement and increased likelihood of experiencing violence in their communities. And in neighborhoods affected by chronic poverty, children, especially minority youth, are far more likely to witness serious violence, which compounds risk and trauma. Ultimately, physical abuse must be taken seriously, not only because of its immediate impact, but because of its powerful, long-lasting effects on future generations. Next, let's turn to child neglect, which is actually the most common form of child maltreatment in the United States. Even though we often hear more about physical or sexual abuse, children are neglected far more frequently than they are abused. There is no single federal definition of child neglect, but across states, the concept generally refers to a child under the age of 18 whose parent or caregiver fails to provide the basic care and support needed for the child's health, education, or welfare. This includes failing to provide adequate food, clothing, shelter, medical care, or supervision. We typically break neglect into three main types. Physical neglect includes abandonment, expelling a child from the home, failing to seek or delaying needed medical care, providing inadequate supervision, or failing to supply adequate food, clothing, or shelter. Emotional neglect occurs when caregivers do not provide adequate nurturing, affection, or attention. It can also include permitting harmful behavior, such as allowing a child to use drugs or alcohol, or ignoring the child's emotional and developmental needs. Educational neglect happens when a parent or caregiver allows chronic truancy, fails to enroll the child in school, or ignores educational or special education needs. One important point is that although neglect may appear less dramatic or less visible than physical abuse, its long-term consequences can be equally damaging. Neglected children often experience developmental delays, emotional and behavioral difficulties, school failure, and even medical complications. They are also at a higher risk of future involvement with the juvenile and criminal justice systems. Another issue connected to neglect is abandonment. Some states treat abandonment as a type of neglect, while others define it separately. In general, abandonment involves situations where a parent's identity or whereabouts are unknown. The parent leaves the child in harmful circumstances, or the parent fails to maintain contact or provide support over a period of time. States also consider the child's age. Abandonment involving infants or young children is typically viewed as particularly serious. Neglect also has a troubling pattern. Families identified for neglect are significantly more likely to experience repeat incidents compared to families involved primarily in physical abuse. That cycle of neglect can lead to compounding harm over time. In short, child neglect is common. It is often chronic, and its effects can be deeply damaging to a child's physical, emotional, and educational development. Now let's discuss emotional abuse, which is sometimes called psychological abuse. Unlike physical abuse, emotional abuse is often invisible, but its effects can be just as damaging. Emotional abuse occurs in families where children's opinions are ignored or never sought. It is common in households where adults fail to spend quality time with children, where children's requests are delayed or dismissed with phrases like, "not right now," "maybe later," or "we'll see." This type of abuse often appears in families who are struggling for economic survival, in households where drugs or other pursuits take precedence over the children, or even in dual career families where there seems never enough time to engage with the children. In some cases, material goods like toys or electronics are used to replace meaningful time and attention. Legally, emotional abuse is sometimes included under the broader category of harm that results in mental injury. Typical statutory language describes it as injury to a child's psychological capacity or emotional stability, often evidenced by observable changes in behavior, emotional response, or cognition. Signs can include anxiety, depression, withdrawal, or aggression. While not all states specifically codify emotional or psychological abuse, many do. As of recent data, 33 states, the District of Columbia, Guam, the Northern Mariana Islands, and Puerto Rico include definitions of emotional abuse in their child welfare statutes. Examples include Alaska, California, New York, Texas, and Pennsylvania, among others. Even when defined in law, emotional abuse can be hard to identify and address in practice. The definitions can be ambiguous, and proving emotional abuse in court is very challenging. Protective agencies often prioritize cases with visible, physical evidence or moral urgency, such as sexual abuse, over emotional abuse, which is harder to see and quantify. As a result, children experiencing emotional abuse may go unprotected, making early identification, awareness, and intervention critical for their long-term well-being. Next, let's examine sexual abuse, one of the most serious forms of child maltreatment. Sexual abuse involves the use of a child for the sexual gratification or financial benefit of the perpetrator. This can include sexual contact, exploitation through pornography or prostitution, or other sexually abusive activities. 33 states specifically include human trafficking, including sex trafficking of children, in their definitions of sexual abuse. Sexual abuse typically involves victims who are too young to understand what is happening. Force or threats of force may accompany the abuse, and the perpetrator is often a parent, family member, or other adult known to the child. Statutes generally include incest, criminal sexual abuse, and criminal sexual assault. Criminal sexual abuse often involves intentional fondling of the child's genitals, breasts, or other body parts. Criminal sexual assault includes contact with or intrusion into the child's sex organs, anus, or mouth, sometimes using objects or other forms of force. Sexual exploitation, including involvement in pornography or prostitution, is considered an additional form of abuse in some states. Interestingly, while reports of child maltreatment have increased over the past few decades, the proportion of reports that involve sexual abuse has actually decreased. Between 1992 and 2000, substantiated sexual abuse cases dropped by 40%. More recent data indicates that sexual abuse accounts for roughly 8% of all reported child abuse cases, with older children, particularly those aged 12 to 15, at higher risk. Most perpetrators are adult males and most victims are female, though all gender combinations are reported. Research shows that unlike other forms of abuse, many sexual abuse offenses are committed by adults outside the caregiver role. Sexual abuse has particularly strong links to negative outcomes for children. For example, girls in the juvenile justice system often report past sexual abuse, which is associated with poor mental health, school difficulties, substance use, risky sexual behavior, and delinquency. When the offender is a parent, the non-offending spouse may be aware of the abuse but fail to intervene, sometimes even defending the perpetrator. Some offenders are pedophiles, defined as individuals with ongoing sexual attraction to pre-pubertal children. Not all pedophiles abuse children, and not all offenders are pedophiles. Many offenders can manipulate and exploit children skillfully, making detection difficult. Detecting sexual abuse is inherently challenging. Children may not understand what the abuse is wrong, especially when it involves a trusted adult. They may fear not being believed, worry about disrupting family dynamics, or feel guilt and responsibility for the abuse. Children are more likely to report abuse by strangers than by family members or known adults, which complicates intervention. Over time, the effects of sexual abuse can emerge in adolescence or adulthood. Older children may act out through risky sexual behavior, substance use, self-harm, running away, or extreme apathy. Young victims may carry deep-seated guilt and trauma, which can manifest in multiple ways as they mature. Sexual abuse is therefore not only a profound violation of a child's safety and trust, but it also carries serious long-term psychological, emotional, and behavioral consequences that must be recognized and addressed. Let's discuss internet exploitation, which is increasingly recognized as a serious form of sexual abuse. The internet has created new opportunities for child predators to operate globally, often with anonymity that reduces the risk of detection. There isn't a single universally accepted definition of internet offending. Broadly, it includes exchanging child pornography, locating potential victims for sexual abuse, engaging in inappropriate sexual communication, and corresponding with others who have deviant sexual interests in children. Predators use websites, chat rooms, discussion boards, and email to commit these offenses. Some online platforms, like certain wiki sites for children, have even been used to validate pedophilic interests. To combat this, the federal government has enacted laws such as the Protect Our Children Act of 2008, which requires a national strategy for child exploitation prevention and interdiction. Federal investigations, such as Operation Broken Heart, have arrested thousands of online offenders, often targeting child pornography, sexual abuse, and sex trafficking. Federal statutes provide the legal framework to prosecute these crimes. For example, child pornography under Section 18 U.S.C. Sections 2251, 2252, 2260. Sexual abuse under 18 U.S.C. Sections 2241 through 2244. Transportation for illegal sexual activity and trafficking under 18 U.S.C. Sections 1591, 2422, and 2423. These statutes address production, distribution, and possession of pornography, sexual abuse of minors, and the transportation of children for sexual exploitation, including cross-border offenses. Globally, international treaties like the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child and its optional protocols, along with European conventions on cybercrime and child protection, encourage nations to cooperate. They promote communication between countries, parents, internet service providers, and travel companies to protect children from sexual exploitation. The internet allows predators to interact with children in ways that can lead to grooming and sexual contact. Rapid communication, anonymity, and unsupervised access make online spaces a preferred medium for offenders. It's important to note that children's own curiosity or desire for information can make them vulnerable. Adolescents may seek sexual information online or engage in risky interactions without fully understanding the consequences. This makes them susceptible to manipulation and exploitation. In short, internet exploitation is a modern extension of sexual abuse. It demonstrates how technology can facilitate victimization and underscores the need for vigilance, prevention strategies, and legal enforcement to protect children online. Child abuse cases are often difficult to litigate for several reasons. Establishing the competency and credibility of the child victim or witness can be challenging, as can determining the admissibility of out-of-court statements. Issues involving husband-wife, physician-patient, or clergy-penitent privileges may further complicate proceedings. In addition, character witness evidence such as prior acts of abuse or expert testimony on the battered child or battering parent syndrome can be controversial, and many children find it extremely difficult to confront the alleged perpetrator in court. There are a number of direct services available for child abuse victims. Children's Advocacy Centers, or CACs, provide neutral, child and family-friendly environments where victims and families can receive a range of services and referrals. CACs serve as centralized hubs for multidisciplinary victim-centered responses, and there are over 800 CACs nationwide. Domestic violence shelters offer temporary refuge for individuals escaping violent or abusive situations, including dating violence, and can help victims find support and referrals. Health centers, often nonprofit or public, serve medically underserved populations and provide basic health care services to children and families. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children provides mental health and child welfare professionals to help families, law enforcement, and social service agencies, offering a support network for child victims. Runaway and homeless youth programs offer shelter and comprehensive services for youth coerced into sex trafficking or exploitation. Sexual assault programs and rape crisis centers provide advocacy, crisis support, and education for victims of sexual abuse. Several national hotlines provide confidential 24/7 assistance to victims. The Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline can assist with crisis intervention and referrals in over 200 languages. The National Domestic Violence Hotline connects victims to trained advocates for support and resources. The National Human Trafficking Resource Center hotline provides a safe space to report trafficking tips and access services. The National Runaway Safe Line offers counseling and links to programs for at-risk youth, while the National Teen Dating Abuse Helpline connects teens to peer advocates for support and safety planning. RAINN, RAINN, operates the National Sexual Assault online and telephone hotlines, providing confidential support and local resource referrals. SAMHSA's National Helpline connects individuals and families to mental health and substance use disorder treatment resources. The investigation and response process generally begins when someone reports suspected abuse to a direct service agency or hotline. Investigators conduct home visits and interviews with the child, parents, and others involved, followed by a risk assessment to determine the appropriate action. Medical professionals may become involved for emergency care or evaluation, and police or child protective investigators present findings to prosecutors. Educators and mental health professionals often participate to ensure the child's well-being throughout the process. Legal procedures may include videotaped testimony, closed-circuit television, and expert testimony to protect victims. The United States Supreme Court in White v. Illinois in 1992 affirmed that hearsay statements made by child victims to trusted adults could be admitted in court, allowing children to avoid direct confrontation with offenders. Some cases involve specialized investigative techniques, such as Munchausen syndrome by proxy, in which a caregiver fabricates or induces illness in a child. Investigations may involve constant observation, cooperation with medical staff, and hidden cameras. A high-profile example of this abuse is the case of Gypsy Rose Blanchard, who was subjected to years of medical abuse by her mother. Many states now emphasize maintaining the family unit whenever possible while investigating abuse. Differential or alternative responses allow child protective services workers with parents to address stressors and prevent further abuse. These responses may include one-time financial support, providing essential household items, or offering life coaching to improve family functioning. The goal is to prevent abuse and neglect while keeping children safely in their homes with their families. National task forces such as the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force work alongside agencies like the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children to combat online exploitation and locate missing children. Parents play a critical role by monitoring their children's internet activity and reporting suspicious contacts. Additional prevention initiatives include child fatality review teams and federal statutes that criminalize child abuse and exploitation, such as laws against child pornography, sextortion, child sex trafficking, and illegal visual depictions of minors. The National Child Exploitation Threat Assessment has focused on child pornography, live-streamed abuse, sex trafficking, and offender registry violations. Since 2010, over 500,000 law enforcement officers have been trained, resulting in more than 54,000 investigations and 8,500 arrests for child exploitation. Child abuse cases present unique challenges in litigation. Key difficulties include establishing the credibility of the child, handling out-of-court hearsay statements, navigating privilege issues, such as issues with physician-patient and husband-wife privileges, and addressing the child's fear of confronting their alleged perpetrator. Courts have developed procedures to protect child victims, including videotaped testimony, one-way closed-circuit testimony, and expert testimony. Despite these measures, reports suggest that only a minority of child maltreatment cases are fully investigated, with investigations influenced by the referring agency, the availability of alternative responses, and prior case histories. Effective intervention begins when abuse is reported to direct service agencies or state or national hotlines. Children's advocacy centers, domestic violence shelters, health centers, runaway and homeless youth programs, and sexual assault programs provide critical services. Hotlines such as Child Help, the National Domestic Violence Hotline, the National Human Trafficking Resource Center, and the National Runaway Safe Line offer crisis support and referrals. Investigations often involve coordinated efforts among police, child protection agencies, educators, and mental health professionals. sometimes using specialized investigators to minimize re-traumatization and maximize accuracy. Special investigative techniques are also employed in complex abuse cases, such as Munchausen syndrome by proxy, in which caregivers fabricate or induce illness in children. These cases have required covert surveillance and constant medical supervision to protect the child. States increasingly implement differential or alternative responses to preserve family units while addressing abuse, offering services that range from parenting support to financial assistance. The rise of internet-facilitated child exploitation has added new challenges. Darknet networks, including Tor, host vast numbers of sexual abuse images, with FBI analysis revealing millions of files and hundreds of thousands of users engaging in illegal activity. Mobile apps, social networking, and live streaming sites allow offenders to groom, coerce, and exploit children at unprecedented scales. Organized groups, including gangs, are increasingly involved, using events and online platforms to traffic and exploit minors. National task forces, such as the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force, and agencies like the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, work with law enforcement to investigate and prevent exploitation. Prevention also relies on parents monitoring their children's online activity and educating them about potential danger. Support for victims extends beyond the legal intervention. Nonprofit agencies like the Center for Children and Families provide therapeutic services for youth and families, including aftercare programs such as family foundations, which assist juveniles reintegrating after state custody. Family justice centers offer support for domestic violence victims, reflecting the importance of collaborative, community-based approaches. The 2016 National Strategy for Child Exploitation Prevention and Interdiction highlighted the evolving nature of child exploitation and outlined federal goals, targeting emerging technologies and offender networks, enhancing international collaboration, identifying victims, conducting awareness and prevention campaigns, and improving victim services and legislative frameworks. Since 2010, these efforts have trained over 500,000 law enforcement officers, completed more than 54,000 investigations, and resulted in thousands of arrests, including for gang-related child prostitution under RICO. Advocacy for juvenile victims is essential. Children may be too afraid to report abuse due to fear of losing their parents or being further victimized. Courts and child protection agencies must ensure children are represented, supported, and believed. Research indicates false allegations are rare, emphasizing the importance of taking children's reports seriously. Protecting children now prevents future victimization and contributes to long-term societal well-being. Career opportunities in this field include roles such as social and human service assistants, who help connect children and families to essential services, ensure safety, and provide follow-up support under professional supervision. Sorry, that was a long one. It's important to recognize that some topics are heavy and can be emotionally taxing. Taking a moment to pause, breathe, and process what we've just discussed allows us to regain perspective and engage more thoughtfully. These brief breaks help us manage discomfort, prevent overwhelming feelings, and prepare to return to challenging material with clarity and focus. Here's a picture of my dogs. They don't know anything about what we talked about, and I think they're happier for it. Today's discussion has highlighted the serious and complex nature of violence committed against juveniles, from child abuse and neglect to exploitation through gangs, trafficking, and the internet. We've seen how difficult it can be to detect, investigate, and prosecute such cases, particularly given the vulnerabilities of child victims and the sometimes competing interests of family integrity and child safety. We've explored the wide array of intervention strategies, including direct services like advocacy centers, shelters, hotlines, and specialized law enforcement task forces, as well as legal tools such as federal statutes and RICO prosecutions. We also examine the evolving challenges posed by technology, the dark web, and social media in facilitating exploitation and the corresponding national strategies designed to combat these crimes. Despite the heaviness of this subject, it's crucial to remember that effective prevention, intervention, and prosecution can make a profound difference in children's lives. The work of protective agencies, law enforcement, nonprofit organizations, and communities collectively contributes to safeguarding juveniles and breaking cycles of abuse. While the material may be difficult to process, understanding the mechanisms of abuse and the systems in place to address it equips us to advocate more effectively and respond responsibly when confronted with these realities. Ultimately, recognizing the scope of the problem and the tools we have to intervene and the continued need for vigilance reinforces our commitment to protecting children and ensuring their safety and well-being. I'll see you in Chapter 4.